Okay, good morning. Welcome to BodyMoves Flexible Feet. If you're just dialing in, this lesson can be done seated or in lying. If you choose to lie on the floor, and that's how the lesson is written originally, a carpeted surface or an exercise mat. If you choose to sit on a sturdy armless chair, a couch, a bed is too squishy. Our foot will need to glide across the floor. So socks on a smooth surface or putting a plastic shopping bag also works well. I'm Dotti Harness-Foster, and there's all my contact information. I'll have that back up on the screen in a bit at the end of this lesson. So this is a Feldenkrais lesson that is one of my favorite. It helps to reorganize how your foot meets the ground, which means from your foot to your ankle up into your knees and your hip. And in the end, you may find that your balance is a bit more on target. So we talk a little bit about technology each day. Thank you for coming in early so we can test the video and audio. My husband is here monitoring the chat because you're all muted right now. So if you have any questions or comments, he's here to monitor that. And my goal also is to provide enough audio verbal prompts that you may not need the video, because if the reception on your end is real choppy, the video gobbles up a lot of bandwidth. So you can stop your video and still participate in the class. You don't need to take notes because I'll provide you a link, a video, and the Council on the Arts may send you a survey for your input. So this class is ideal for athletes, runners, all kinds of sports that involve moving forward. If you have feet, ankle, and hip, knee issues, this is also ideal. If you have sprained or fractured anything in the lower part of your torso, this is awesome. Plantar fasciitis, bunions, all of those feet issues. So we're going to start out by walking. If walking is not available to you, imagine walking. And as you walk around, I'm going to question you, provide some questions for you to ponder, an internal dialogue. So you may say, well, I have no idea on the answer of some of these questions. That's okay. As you walk around, notice how your foot rolls across the floor. And which toe is the last to leave the floor? And is it the same on both sides? How does your ankle bend, your knees bend? And what is it that's propelling you forward? Your feet, your knees, your hips. And what is your head doing? Yes, it's moving forward as you travel through space, but is it wobbling, circling around? And when you're done with that, come back to a comfortable seated position, because I am going to bring in Skinny Rick, okay? So, is Skinny Rick. So if this is your first time meeting Skinny Rick, this is the sitting position in this lesson. Feet are hip distance apart, flat on the floor. He's sitting in his chair. His arms are just on his lap. Now I want to bring your attention to, I brought in this bowl. We hear a lot about the pelvic bowl. So in the seated position, I'm going to be bringing your awareness to this pelvic bowl that is filled with water and sits right there. Okay, now give me a moment. I'm going to show you some of the same position with Skinny Rick lying down. Move my chair and my chair. Rick, my chair. I forgot. Okay. So if you choose to do this lesson lying down, your arms are just down by your side. And why this lesson is done so easily in sit or lie, notice that this is the sitting position. We've just changed the orientation. Lying with your knees bent and feet standing works just as well. And I need you to hand me the blue bowl. Now, what is fascinating is all the bones in our feet. That's okay, don't worry about it. We have 26 bones in our feet, and we pound them all day long. So this lesson is really going to be asking us to open up all of the tendons, the muscles, and joints in our foot. We're going to start out just sliding your foot forward and bringing your foot back towards your pelvis. And then we're going to go side to side. And towards the end of the lesson, we're moving our foot around in a circle. Now, what's the hardest part about this is keeping all the pads of the toes in contact with the floor. And I'm going to reach over here and get my pelvic bowl. So in the lying down position, I'm going to bring your awareness to the pelvic bowl, which is going to be filled with water. It's imaginary, and set it right there as if when you're lying down. Okay? So now it's your turn to take a moment to get set up in how you want to do this lesson. And I mentioned to you also that the foot is going to be gliding across the floor. So if you're on a carpeted surface, you will need a plastic bag. This works out just fine. Okay, so you're in charge of ease and comfort lying on the floor. I'm going to start on the right side, but if that's not the most available side, you start out on the left. So here's a picture of me when we were traveling. In this, if you're lying on the floor, bent knees and your feet are standing. Okay, and here's our pelvic bowl. You're in your position, and I want you to imagine that pelvic bowl filled with water all the way up to the brim. One more drop of water and it would spill over. And as you sit there or lie there, what direction would your water spill out right now? Just get a sense of that at the beginning of the lesson. And explore tilting your pelvis forward, bringing your belly closer to your lap, arching your back, allowing that imaginary bowl of water spilling a bit forward in the direction of your feet. And then settle yourself back down to your normal sitting or lying position. Could you tilt your pelvis to the right or to the left and intentionally drop a bit of water to the right or to the left out of that imaginary pelvic bowl of water? Play around with that just a bit. Come back to your starting point. This lesson involves a lot of imagination. So I want you to imagine that you have a tray of gooey paint off to your right side. You're going to imagine placing the sole of your right foot in that tray of paint, setting it back down in the starting point, and slide your right foot forward and back to the starting point. So your right foot is gliding across the floor. It's gooed up with paint. All the pads of the toes stay in contact with the floor. And then you bring your heel back closer to your pelvis or the base of your chair. As you do this, what does it feel like is the width of that stripe that you are painting on the floor? Take it slow. You may notice that the pelvic bowl of water, it wants to jiggle a bit. Let that happen. And now lower your left leg and continue this movement. So the left leg extends long if you're lying on the floor. If you're sitting, the left leg just comes out with a bit of the heel touching. You don't have full support. And you may notice that this tends to anchor the pelvis a little bit to the left on the diagonal. Your bowl of water may want to drip a bit to the left. Continue sliding your right foot forward and back. And observe if there's any differences with your left leg long and weighted and anchoring your pelvis. And then bend that left leg, bring it back to the starting point, and compare the changes between when your left leg is long and providing an anchor versus when it is standing and supporting your pelvis. And when you're done with that, let's take a rest. Okay, come back to your starting position and sit or lie. Your feet are flat on the floor. Reestablish your pelvic bowl of water so that it is full of water right up to the brim. And imagine that you have a tray of paint off to your left side. Dip the sole of your left foot in the paint and then imagine and then set it down in your starting point and begin to glide your left foot forward and back. Take it slow enough so that you can make sure all 5 pads of the toes are in contact with the floor. And as your heel glides back to the back of your chair, the heel stays in contact with the floor. How wide is the strip on your left side? Does the pelvic bowl of water, is it jiggling? And where does it want to spill out? After you've done that about 5 or 6 times, lengthen the right leg. So if you're lying on the floor, the right leg is long along the floor. If you're sitting, your right leg heel, just the heel is in contact with the floor. It tends to anchor your pelvis a little bit to the right. You may notice that that pelvic bowl of water wants to spill a bit to the right. You continue sliding your left foot out, making sure each pad of the toe is in contact with the floor. Bring your right foot back to the standing position. Observe the differences between when that right leg is anchoring your pelvis a bit to the right versus when it is standing. And for those of you who are lying on the floor, if you choose to do this lesson and sit, take a rest. If you are lying on the floor, roll over onto your stomach if that is comfortable. Your hands are underneath your forehead so that you can look directly down to the floor. And now the ceiling is going to come down to the sole of your feet. Your knees are bent. The sole of your feet is directed toward the ceiling. The ceiling comes down to meet your feet. And now paint the ceiling with your sole of your feet. Try the right, the left, moving, painting the ceiling with a forward and backward slide. So as you bring your heel closer to your pelvis, your toes go slide away, back and forth. Just test it out 2 or 3 times. And when you're done with that, roll over, rest on your back with the rest of us taking a little bit of a break. When you feel ready, come back to your starting point and sit or lie. Remember, if you're on carpeted surface, you may need your foot in a plastic bag so that it glides across the floor. And imagine that you have a tray of paint off to your right side. Dip your sole in the imaginary tray of paint off to your right side, and then place it there in the starting point, and slide your right foot further to the right and then back. And continue this back and forth, side to side movement about 5 or 6 times. Enable the foot to move sideways. So it's not a real big movement because all the pads of the toes need to stay in contact with the floor. If you feel that you are creeping or crawling your foot, use that plastic bag so that it's a smooth back and forth movement. And you may be wondering, what's the role of your knee? Your knee is also going a bit side to side, right to left, but the foot tends to move further than the knee. Take it slow so that all the bones in your foot have an opportunity to move around and accommodate this movement. Also notice what is happening with your pelvic bowl of water. Does it tend to want to spill over to the right? And when you come back to the left, is it jiggling around? And try the same movement by extending the left leg long. So you continue sliding your right foot to the side and back to the center while your left leg is long. Long if you're lying on the floor. If you choose to sit, your left heel is in contact with the floor. The essence of this is that it anchors your pelvis a little bit at the diagonal on the left. You may get a sense that that pelvic bowl of water is spilling a bit over to the left diagonal. Rid yourself of any tension in that left leg. It's a very delicate movement. Feel free to then bend that left leg coming back to the starting point so you can compare the difference with your left leg long and then your left leg supporting you. And when you're done with that, let's take a rest. So as you can tell, this awareness through movement lesson, which we sometimes abbreviate as ATM, involves a lot of imagination. The purpose of the imagination is, in this case, really to open up all the bones of the foot. We have 26 bones in our feet. They say 30 joints. I say there's probably more. And up to 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. So by the image of painting the floor with our feet, we're encouraging all of these muscles and tendons to open up and allow more movement in your foot, which is just a dynamic way of taking care of some of the mobility, some of the habits that we have, and pain issues. So come back to your starting point in sit or lie. And off to your left side is a tray of paint. Dip your left foot in that tray of paint and bring it back to the starting point and slide your left foot off to the left and back. And repeat this movement about 5 or 6 times, taking it slow enough that you can really think about all the pads of the toes staying in contact with the floor. So it's as if your toes are just dragging across the floor. So release that unnecessary tension in your foot, your lower leg, because it's that tension, that unnecessary muscular effort that often leads to pain and strain in your feet and your lower leg. Allow those muscles to lengthen. And then extend the right leg long along the floor if you're lying. If you're sitting, just your right heel is off to the right. You get a sense that that pelvic bowl of water wants to drip a little bit to the diagonal on the right-hand side. Continue painting the floor, going side to side with your left foot. Then bring your right foot back to the starting point so that you can compare how this changes the movement in your pelvis. Soften your ribs, your chest, allow your head to be involved. When you're done exploring that, if you're sitting, take a rest. If you're doing this lying on the floor, roll over onto your belly. Do like we did before, bringing one heel closer to your pelvis, and then the foot goes away from you. The ceiling has come down. Your knees are bent. The sole of your feet is directed toward the ceiling. The ceiling, imaginary ceiling, comes down to meet the sole of your feet, and you're sliding each foot, heel coming closer to your pelvis, painting the ceiling with the sole of your feet. And after you've done that a few times, roll over onto your back and rest with the rest of us. And as you lie there in your resting position, reaffirm your pelvic bowl of water. Make sure that it is filled right up to the brim, so that a slightest tilt of your pelvis, it would spill one way or the other, forward, back, off at a diagonal. Okay, come back to your starting position with your feet flat on the floor, sitting or lying. And there is a paint tray right there to your right. Imagine dipping the sole of your right foot in that tray of paint and placing it back into the starting point. Refresh the line going forward and back and side to side. So you're making like a railroad cross, forward and back, side to side, taking the tension out of your foot and your lower leg. And when you have your cross well established, begin to make a circle with your foot. Your right foot is gliding around in a circle. And the knee also makes a bit of a circle, but not as big as your foot. So from your knee down to the surface of your foot is like a cone shape, an imaginary cone. And change the direction of the circle if you haven't already. Soften your belly. Allow the bowl, that pelvic imaginary bowl of water, to jiggle around. Allow your chest to be apart. You may notice, especially if you're lying on the floor, that your head is also making a circular movement, the back of the head making a circular pattern on the floor. Change the direction of your foot. Allow that water to jiggle around in the bowl, making waves, spilling over. And when you're done with that, we're going to take a rest. Rest in lying, rest in sitting. There's a lot to track in this lesson. Reestablish your pelvic bowl of water in sit or in lying. Make sure the bowl is full of water. Come back to your starting point with your feet flat on the floor. Your knees are bent. If you're lying, your arms are down by your side. If you're sitting, your hands are in your lap. There's an imaginary tray of paint off to your left side. Imagine picking up your left foot, dipping it into that tray of paint and coming back to the starting point and paint with your left foot that forward and back stripe. So the toes are gliding forward, painting a stripe on the floor. Then the heel comes back closer to your pelvis. Do that about 2 or 3 times. And then reestablish the stripe that goes side to side. So your left foot goes off to the left and then comes back in the direction of your right foot. So then you have a nice cross pattern that's freshly painted, and then begin to move your foot in a circular pattern. Notice this circle is easier than the other side. And can you reduce the effort so that the tension is not gripping your toes or your ankle? The back of your calf is relaxed. The muscles in your quad, they're reducing the tension. Allow your pelvis, that bowl, a pelvic bowl is jiggling around. Your ribs, your head may be rolling. Switch directions, the circular movement of your left foot if you haven't already. And what happens if you extend your right leg long along the floor if you're lying? If you're sitting, your right heel is just off to the right. How does that change the level of your pelvic bowl? Does it want to make more waves and drip and spill off to the right? Remember, trying to reduce the effort so that those muscles and tendons in your foot can really mobilize and lengthen around the bones in your ankle and your knee and up into your hip. Feel free to change directions at any time and bring your right foot back to standing, comparing, noticing the differences. If you're in sit, feel free to rest and take a break. If you're doing this lesson lying, roll over onto your belly, bend your knees, the sole of the feet come in the direction of the ceiling. The ceiling, imagine it coming down to the sole of your feet, and paint the ceiling, making a stripe back and forth, maybe a circular movement, just a few times on each foot, releasing the tension in your belly. And when you're done with that, take a rest, lying on your back, and join the rest of us taking a bit of a break. So the pelvic bowl of water is a classic imaginary method to help us really bring our awareness to what's happening in our pelvis. So it may sound very, very odd and different because we're not accustomed to that, but it does bring your awareness to things you may never have thought about. And the pelvic is what drives us forward and helps get ourselves organized, mobilized, and balanced. So we see this happening a lot in an awareness through movement lesson. So coming back to your starting position, and if you're seated, bring your knees and your ankles, whether you're seated or lying, bring your ankles and your knees together. Imagine that they're tied together, Velcroed or glued together. They are touching. And now with both of your feet touching, slide around in a circle. So you're making a circle with both of your feet. Your ankles and your knees stay together, so the circle is a lot smaller. Notice which direction you chose to go first and switch directions. And how does this circular movement with both of your feet affect the movement in that pelvic bowl of water? Take the tension out of your belly and your chest. If you're lying on the floor, you may get a sense that this circular movement is traveling all the way through your spine and wants to draw a circle with the back of the head in contact with the mat. You may get a sense if you're sitting that your head is also moving about in a circle, and change the direction that your feet are going. Let your whole torso make a circle. Your pelvis, your ribs, soften your throat, your chest, so that everything is helping you paint a So if you're lying on the floor, you may get the sense that the back of your head is drawing a circle on the floor. And when you're done with this, this is the very tail end of the lesson. So feel free to explore any variations that we have talked about in the last 20, 30 minutes, extending one leg long, the other leg long, changing the direction of your circle, including as much of yourself in that circle. And take a moment to rest. And our next step is getting up to walk around so that we can compare how this lesson has changed the mobility of our foot, our knees, our hips. But first, take a rest. So coming up to your standing walking position, if you choose to sit this out, you can imagine walking in your seat. As you walk around, compare the changes that you may notice in the last 20, 30 minutes. The roll of your foot across the floor. Which toe is the last to leave as you propel yourself forward, and is it the same on each foot? Notice when the knee comes forward. And how much is your pelvis involved now? If you put your hands around your ribs, you may get a sense that your ribs and your torso and your chest are involved in this movement. How do your arms swing? Where do you look? How much does your head want to bob, move around? So this is the end of the lesson. Typically we walk a bit more, but I understand that you're doing this in your home, and for a lot of us, we don't have that much walking space in our home. So continue to notice throughout your day changes in your walk. Now this is a interesting but complex lesson because there's so much imagination involved. I repeat this lesson again for you on Saturday. There's notes available also and a video recording at the end of the week. Next week, we're going to be mobilizing our pelvis because the pelvis is our power center. And we meet up each Wednesday and Saturday, 9:30 in the morning, Alaska time. So Feel free to put questions in the chat. My husband is here to monitor. If you feel this lesson has been helpful, it's brought to you absolutely free by the Northwest chapter of the American Parkinson's Disease Association in conjunction with the Homer Council on the Arts. So if it has been helpful to you, be heartful and consider a donation to each one of those organizations. On the screen, I have all my contact information. My website is up to date with what is happening next week, the handouts, my contact, my email. And I hope that you have happy toes, happy feet, and can move about.